A newly appointed police chief walked into his own precinct undercover, determined to see his officers as they really were, with no masks, no pretenses. But when a white officer spat in his face, thinking he was just another nobody, the entire room was just moments away from a truth that would leave them completely stunned. It was a humid Tuesday morning in August when Richard Nelson, the new police chief, stepped out of his car in the center of Blue Ridge, a quiet little city hidden in the rolling hills of North Carolina. Wearing a simple plaid shirt, old jeans and worn-out sneakers, Richard didn't look like someone who had spent 20 years moving up in law enforcement. And that's exactly what he wanted. Richard believed in seeing things as they really were, not through planned meetings or carefully staged welcomes. As a black man taking on a leadership role in a precinct that people whispered about for its bad behavior, he wanted to see the truth, raw and unfiltered. What better way to do that than to blend in? The parking lot was busy with officers walking in and out. Richard looked around, noticing their casual conversations and the quick glances they gave him. No one seemed to know who he was. That made sense. His appointment had only been announced a few days earlier, and he had purposely kept his arrival quiet until the official inspection later that day. He adjusted the brim of his baseball cap and took a deep breath. The heavy responsibility to clean out the hidden problems inside the department sat firmly on his shoulders. He wasn't new to pushback, but he knew this job would challenge him in ways he had never faced before. As he walked toward the building, faint laughter floated through the air. Richard slipped inside through the side entrance, unnoticed. The place buzzed with the sound of officers chatting and phones constantly ringing. The shiny tile floors reflected the harsh fluorescent lights, and the bitter smell of old coffee filled the air. Richard walked slowly, watching how people acted around each other. Some officers gathered near desks telling stories. Others quietly flipped through papers. No one really noticed him. Until he stopped near the break room. "Hey, you!" a sharp voice sliced through the noise. Richard turned to see a white officer walking toward him with a smug smile on his face. His badge said, "Officer Daniels." A few other officers leaned against the wall behind him, clearly interested in the scene. Richard opened his mouth to say something, but Daniels didn't give him a chance. "Lost, are we?" "This isn't a homeless shelter," Daniels sneered. "You need to take that nonsense somewhere else." Richard froze. The insult hit him hard. He wasn't sure if he should reveal who he was right then, or wait and let this play out. Before he could decide, Daniels stepped closer, his voice louder now for the crowd behind him. "Didn't you hear me? I said get out! We don't need your kind hanging around here!" Laughter echoed from the officers nearby. Richard's jaw tightened, his heart pounding. He tried to speak, but Daniels leaned in, his face just inches away. Then, without warning, the officer spat straight into Richard's face. For a moment it felt like time stopped. Richard's breath caught in his throat as the warm spit slid down his cheek. Around him the laughter got louder. One officer even slapped the table, bending over with laughter, while another quietly said something about putting the riffraff in their place. Richard's mind raced. He could feel his heart pounding in his ears, but he stayed calm. Slowly and carefully, he pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his face. "Is this how you treat everyone who walks through these doors?" Richard asked, his voice steady but firm. Daniels smirked. "Only the ones who don't belong here." The group burst into laughter again. Richard didn't say another word. He simply turned and walked down the hallway, leaving the officers behind. As he made his way to the main office, the intercom crackled. "All personnel, report to the briefing room." It was time. The briefing room buzzed with chatter as officers filed in, some holding coffee, others laughing about their own inside jokes. Richard entered quietly through a side door, now holding a folder stamped with the precinct's official seal. He stood just out of sight, watching the room fill with faces, some still smiling from the earlier scene. At the front, Captain Harris, a stocky man with a grey moustache, called for attention. "All right, settle down, everyone. We've got an important introduction today." The room slowly quieted as curiosity grew. Daniels leaned casually against the wall, his arms crossed, still wearing that smug grin. Captain Harris cleared his throat. "As most of you know, Chief Caldwell retired last month. We've been waiting for his replacement. I'm proud to introduce our new chief, a man with an outstanding record and a strong vision for this department." Richard stepped forward, his steps calm and steady. The entire room fell silent as he walked up to the podium. His quiet, confident presence grabbed everyone's attention. He placed the folder on the lectern and slowly looked around the room. The silence grew heavier. Daniel's grin faded, the color drained from his face as he finally recognized Richard. Officers shifted uneasily, whispering and staring, eyes wide. "Good morning," Richard said, his voice firm and clear. "My name is Richard Nelson. Starting today, I'm your new chief of police." You could hear a pin drop. Daniels's face turned bright red. His cocky attitude disappeared. Richard's eyes locked on him for just a second longer than needed before moving on to the rest of the room. "When I arrived this morning," Richard continued, "I came dressed in plain clothes because I wanted to see this department without filters, without preparation. I wanted to see the real picture." A low murmur spread across the crowd, but Richard raised his hand, and the room he instantly fell quiet. "In just a short time here, I've already witnessed behavior that's not only unprofessional, it's completely unacceptable." His words landed hard. "Let's be very clear, the toxic culture that's been allowed to grow here ends today." No one moved. The silence was heavy. Daniels shifted where he stood, his eyes now stuck on the floor. Richard stepped closer to the edge of the podium, his voice still sharp but controlled. "Respect is not optional. It's the base of everything we do in law enforcement. Without it, we don't just fail each other. We fail the community we've sworn to protect." Richard let the silence stretch, watching the officers squirm under his steady gaze. "This morning," he said, "some of you laughed. You thought you were watching just another powerless man being put in his place. But let me remind you, everyone who walks through these doors deserves respect, whether they wear a badge or not." His words cut through the room like a sharp blade. No one moved. Richard held the silence a little longer, his stare firm and unshaken. The air in the room was thick with tension. Every officer could feel the weight of what he had said. Daniels shifted again, clearly uncomfortable, sweat now shining on his forehead. But Richard wasn't finished. "I know change is hard," he continued, his voice calm but firm. "But let me be clear. There will be zero tolerance for behavior that disrespects anyone's dignity, whether it's a fellow officer, a civilian, or anyone else." Richard stepped down from the podium, walking slowly toward the group. He moved with quiet power, his voice steady but full of intensity. "Officer Daniels," Richard said, stopping just a few feet away. Daniels flinched, all the confidence he had earlier completely gone. "You," Richard continued, locking eyes with him, "represent everything that's wrong in this department. When you spat in my face, you didn't just disrespect me, but you disrespected the badge, the oath, and the community we are here to serve." Daniels stammered, "Chief, I didn't know—" "Exactly," Richard cut him off, his voice sharp. "You didn't care to know, you didn't stop to think. You assumed that man in front of you didn't matter, And that kind of thinking is exactly why this department has lost the trust of the people we serve. The room stayed completely still. No one dared to move. Richard's eyes swept over the rest of the officers. What I saw today wasn't just one man's mistake. It's a problem with the culture here. A culture where bullying and prejudice are not just allowed, they're encouraged. That ends now. He walked back to the podium, his voice a little stronger now. I've spent my career fighting for justice, not just on the streets, but inside departments like this. Change won't be quick, and it won't be easy. But as long as I'm chief, this place will stand for integrity, respect, and accountability. He paused, letting the message settle in. Then he nodded toward Captain Harris. Effective immediately, Officer Daniels is suspended pending a full investigation. A wave of gasps spread across the room. Daniels's face burned red as he clenched his jaw, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Richard stood tall, unmoved. This isn't about punishment, he said firmly. It's about setting a new standard. If you're not willing to meet that standard, then this isn't the place for you. He slowly looked around the room, locking eyes with each officer. But if you're ready to grow, to be better, we'll move forward together. Just know this. I will hold every one of you accountable from this day on. The meeting ended in heavy silence. The officers quietly shuffled out, no one speaking, no laughter left. Richard stayed at the podium for a moment, watching as Daniels stormed out, his face twisted with a mix of anger and embarrassment. The other officers kept their eyes down, their faces showing everything from quiet guilt to deep thought. Later, in his office, Richard sat at his desk and let out a long breath. He knew this was just the start. The beliefs that had settled into this place over the years wouldn't change in a day, and some people might never change. But Richard hadn't come to Blue Ridge to make friends. He came to make a difference. The phone rang on his desk. It was Captain Harris. "Chief, I just wanted to say, you handled that better than most would have," Harris said, his voice careful. "Thanks, Captain," Richard replied. "But the real work starts now. I need Daniel's full record on my desk by tomorrow. Complaints, incident reports, everything." "You got it," Harris said. He paused for a second, then added, "Chief, I think you really shook them up today." In a good way. Richard hung up and allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction before turning to the mountain of work waiting for him. In the weeks that followed, the precinct began to feel like a different place. Officers who used to laugh at Daniels's behavior now stayed away from him. His suspension quickly became the talk of the department. Richard made it a habit to walk through the halls often, greeting every officer he passed. His presence became a constant reminder that things were changing. Some officers took it seriously. One day, Officer Reyes, a younger recruit, came to Richard. She quietly admitted that she had gone along with the toxic culture because she was afraid to speak out. "I want to do better, Chief," she said, her voice full of honesty. "That's all I ask," Richard said, kindly but firmly. "It starts with you." But not everyone was ready to change. Daniels filed an appeal, claiming his suspension was unfair. Richard didn't back down. He believed that accountability wasn't optional. When the department reviewed Daniels's record, they found a long history of complaints, excessive force, rude behavior, inappropriate comments. His appeal was denied. Richard made it clear that the days of ignoring bad behavior were over. Even though there was progress, Richard knew the road ahead would still be hard. Talks about bias and building better community relationships weren't always welcomed, but he refused to give up. Every small win, a recruit finding their voice, an officer thinking twice about their actions, moved the department in the right direction. One morning, Richard went to a community event. There, A young boy walked up to him, looking both nervous and curious. "Are you really the chief?" the boy asked, his eyes wide. "I am," Richard said, smiling. "My dad says the police don't care about people like us," the boy whispered. Richard knelt down to look him in the eyes. "I can't change the past," he said softly. "But I promise you, we're working to do better. And if you ever need help, you come find me. Okay?" The boy nodded, a small smile finally breaking through. Moments like that reminded Richard why he took this job. By the end of his first year, the precinct wasn't perfect, but it was definitely different. Officers who couldn't accept the changes had left. New recruits came in, officers who believed in Richard's vision of fairness and respect. Slowly, the community, once distant and doubtful, began to see signs that things were getting better. One evening, Richard stood in the main hallway watching as officers headed home after their shifts. The laughter and conversations in the air sounded different now. Not cruel, not at someone's expense, but real and friendly. Richard knew challenges would keep coming, but for the first time he felt hopeful. Change was never easy, but it was always worth it.